Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bad Luck Gamer, and finally, we have another build video. It's been some time after the remaster blitz. I think I just need a little bit of time away from Pathfinder to regather myself, but I'm back with it here with now not only the first witch build here on the channel, but in addition, one that is remaster approved, as this is going to be taking in some aspects of the remaster, but honestly, this could have worked even before the remaster. So today's build is the Fiendish Conjurer, which is a summoning build completely focused on the witch's ability to get 2 summons out sooner than any other class can. It's actually really cool, and one of the great things about summons is it's a toolkit. It's a spell that gives you a variety of different tools you can use for different situations. Is it a DPR build? No, it's not supposed to be. Summons aren't supposed to do all the work for you. But there are a lot of summons in the game that are very good in combat that can easily hold their own in situations. Maybe not against the boss, but anything just below a boss. And as well, summons tend to have, one, unique abilities that are very handy in combat, and two, they actually tend to have very high stats and skill proficiencies in comparison to characters, just because that's generally how they work. So that being considered, you have to take each summoning as a look into what you're getting out of it. Spell slot for a spell slot, summoning spells are some of the best utility in the game as far as what it can offer. It's an open toolbox. You can sustain it for multiple turns, so it can do damage every turn. Like, if used properly, a use of a summoning spell can output the damage of any other spell slot, which I think is pretty good. So, let's get to the build. So, starting off with our stats. This is a very standard stat layout for a witch. It's going to be Intelligence as our first stat, followed by Con and Wisdom. Con is because you're going to be potentially focusing on 2 spells a turn. That being the case, your mobility is going to be somewhat lacking. So having some extra HP to help buff yourself up is not a bad thing. High Wisdom is actually really good because the sooner you go into initiative, the sooner you can get into position, or the sooner you can get your summon out to take the blow for you, as it were. So that being the case, this is my stat spread. There's a variety of others, but as long as you're keeping in mind that you're still going to need intelligence, that's actually an interesting thing. The build could do with less intelligence. If your primary focus is using summons, your intelligence score doesn't necessarily matter. Now, I'm not saying to do that, of course. I would still recommend putting your intelligence first and foremost, just because whenever you want to use other spells, you want to use your hex cantrips, which is a big part of the build. Obviously, the higher your intelligence, the better. But just an interesting thought, if you want to go with like 2 16s at level 1 instead of an 18 and a 14, then that would be the way to go, in my opinion. So, yeah, beyond that, skill focus. Now, actually, there's no particular skill focus. Not that there couldn't be, of course, and there are different ways you can utilize the use of your summons. But because summons and sustaining the spells are so action intensive, I would have to say that I can't rightly choose what kind of stats to utilize and anything besides outside of combat. And then that's just kind of whatever you want to flavor your character with. So I'm not going to have any skill, focus in this video. Pick whatever suits you best. Maybe it's recall knowledge, so you're just going to go with general lore feats, or maybe you want to invest in some charisma so that you can get off the odd demoralize. In any regard, it's more or less up to you. Patron. So the patron was a very interesting aspect to this, because honestly, it doesn't really matter what your patron is, though I will stipulate it does have some effect, whatever you're doing. Now, for this build, I went with the Faith's Flamekeeper. Now, the reason why I went with Faith's Flamekeeper is predominantly because when you sustain a hex with your familiar out, you can bestow on one willing creature within 15 feet half your level plus 2 temp HP whenever you sustain a hex. Now, a big part of this is going to be using the Cackle hex, which means whenever you use Cackle, you're going to get the effects of your familiars. So that's actually one of the reasons why I chose Witch for this build rather than Summoner or Wizard. Now, I didn't choose Summoner predominantly because, well, lack of spell slots. The lack of spell slots really hurts, and if your primary thing is summoning, I mean, it's just one of the unfortunate aspects of Summoner, which is very ironic. Now, I know you can split your spell slots, and there is ways to do that, but still, the total use of utility that the witch gets, not only just with the fact that they can earlier than Summoner ever could get 2 summons out, but they also just have more spell slots to play around with. In addition, I didn't go with Wizard with the School of the Boundary because, again, similar thing, no Cackle, so early levels when double summoning is at its most effective, it's not going to be something you're going to be capable of doing as Wizard. And honestly, the only thing Wizard really has over Witch in this situation is the innate access to the school spell augment summoning or fortify summoning in the remaster. So that being the case, Witch just seems like the obvious choice. Now, moving back to patrons, you can really use any of the patrons. Now, the spell list I recommend for summoning predominantly is actually either going to be Divine, because it has a lot of really good summons with the ability to summon, celestial entities, fiendish entities, or whatever. What are they called? There's a low level servitor spell. The servitor spell is actually also really, really good. But in addition to this, there's also a lot of good buffing spells, and buffing your summons is actually just a net gain for your side of the combat. So it made the most sense to go with Divine. Primal is probably the next best, or even the best summoning spell list, because it has some of the most spells in the game for summoning purposes. Occult is kind of okay, and so is Arcane. Occult, I think, is just a little lacking in comparison to Divine, so that's why I went with Divine. And of course, not all the familiars are going to be able to get as much ability out of just the normal sustaining action. I mean, with Face Flamekeeper, you're just handing out free temp HP, which I think is just really good, and something that makes it very easy to just either keep your summons up or to help your team in addition to having your summons on the battlefield. It just made the most sense. So with the patron out of the way, let's go ahead and start talking about the feats. And at a second level, when you can select your first feat, really, you're going to get Cackle. It's pretty obvious. Cackle allows you to have 2 summons early game. It's so good. Any other class would need to wait till a minimum level 4, and by the time you're hitting level 4, your summons are already starting to drop off in some power from the early game. And if you didn't are aware, summons typically are 4 levels under the caster, relatively speaking, generally. At level 2, when you're still using first level spell slots, they're actually only 2 levels underneath you, typically. So that gives them the most bang for your buck early game. Now, you don't have a ton of spell slots to obviously play around with, but I guarantee, even at second level, 2 summons in one combat is going to be mighty impactful. And then plus, honestly, it's one of the things that low-level casters suffer with anyway, is lack of spell slots. So that being the case, it's honestly not a bad, trick to have. And witches have, with their hex cantrips, so much ability to help the battlefield anyway. It's just something that I would say, if you're gonna blow everything on one combat anyway, this is the one. This is the way to do it, in my opinion. So how does Cackle work, right? So Cackle allows you as a free action to sustain a spell, which is really good, and it frees up one of your actions. Now, summoning takes 3 actions typically. So that being the case, you normally can't have more than 1 summon until level 16, or at minimum level 4 if you're multiclassing straight into Witch to get Cackle. So starting off with Cackle, it's really good, and being able to utilize your 2 focus points at this point for cackling purposes is really good. So you use your Cackle to sustain your summon, and you use your next summon, and bam, the turn that you get your second summon out, you still get 4 actions of economy, as every time you make a summon, it gets its 2 actions as if you had commanded it. So when you sustain with Cackle, that summon gets 2 actions. You summon again, you get another creature that comes out with 2 more actions. That's 4 action economy, technically 5 if you include the free action of Cackle. It's really good. It's honestly a very strong setup. And yeah, you blow everything on your first combat, but this holds up pretty much into the late game as well. As you can get, like, Summon Fae is such a good spell. Granted, it's on the Divine spell list, but if you are going with any, like, Primal or Occult, Summon Fae is really good because when you can summon unicorns, they're just free heal spells. It's actually really good. Like, a summon can use any spell that it knows that is not of the spell rank used to cast the spell. So I believe Summon Unicorn requires a... Oh, goodness. What was it? I think it's a 3rd rank spell. I think it's a 3rd rank spell, and it can use 1st and 2nd level healing. So, pretty good. 2 spells, essentially. And when you summon it, it also can just heal because it's 2 actions. So, yeah, summoning's really good. At level 4, we're going to pick up Rites of Convocation. Now, Rites of Convocation is going to be a major part of the build because what it allows us to do is we don't need to slot in more summon spells than necessary. What it does is when you get the feat, you select a summoning spell. And then whenever you can take a 10-minute break to swap one of your spells with that summoning spell of the spell rank that you swapped out for. So this allows us to use other spells in those slots until we need to get more summons. This is a lot better even in the late game when you have a lot more spell slots than you even know what to do with. You're always going to have your summons available even after you expend those spell slots. So this just allows us to have other spells in our slots for other situations outside of the need for summons, which I think just makes this build very versatile. And you're essentially just playing a witch, but you have this kind of summoning theme on top of it, which I think is very powerful. At level 6, we're actually going to pick the Wizard Multiclass Archetype, and this is so that at level 8, we can select the Arcane School spell, which will allow us to get Fortify summons, regardless. This just gives all your summon, or this gives one summon you have a +1 to everything for a minute, which pretty much will last the summon's entire duration. This is a very powerful effect. It pretty much levels up your summon, give or take some situations. There's these odd levels where they get 2 boosts rather than 1, but for most summons, this is going to be pretty much a full level boost, which is just going to make your summon more effective. Now, of course, that's a focus point, and we're already using Cackle in combat. And I didn't mention this before, but Cackle also can be used to let you cast a spell as well. When you have 2 summons out, you need 2 sustains. So that would make it impossible to use a spell unless you Cackle one of them, then you can cast a full spell. Augment Summoning takes from that focus pool, but this does give us our 3rd focus point, which does give us a lot of extra ability. And as well, at this point, we're getting really close to the Summon Giant spell, which is another really good one. I don't think that's on the Divine spell list, but it's on other spell lists. And Giants are really good in general, so bumping their stats up is even better. And it even applies to their skill checks, which is really cool. So yeah, we're going to go a couple levels into Wizard just to pick that up. But I also actually decided to do something else extra because we're a summoner build, right? We need to focus on summonings. So at level 10, I chose Basic Arcana. Now, what you select with this can really be anything. Honestly, anything that suits your fancy. There's nothing that really fits the build particularly, and you just need to select this. So at level 12, we can take Advanced Arcana, and this will allow us to take Explosive Arrival. This is a really good feat because it allows us to do damage when we summon creatures. As when you summon a creature, it creates a 10-foot emanation explosion that does a d4 fire damage per spell rank. That is going to allow the use of our summon spell to not only damage the opponent, but our summon then gets 2 actions, and then we can do it the next round with another summon and have 2 summons doing things, and it makes the act of summoning do more and more. We're building upon the effectiveness of our summoning. And at this point, we have 6 level spells. We have tons of spell slots to utilize this with. Even the use of lower rank spell slots can make for some extra damage on the battlefield or just some extra HP to tank in some situations. At level 14, it's really more or less your choice. I chose Major Lesson because getting access to another Hex is really good, especially because our familiar just benefits from the use of Hexes anyway. Later in the build, we're actually going to pick up Hex Master, which allows us to, whenever we cackle, to sustain any of our other Hexes currently going on. So there's really no loss here. And with our familiar, we actually can pick up a familiar ability that lets us restore a focus point as essentially a one action command. So that being the case, we got a lot of focus points to utilize. I couldn't fit in the ability to select Hex Focus, so unfortunately in our downtime we're going to either need extra resting time or the like, but that's mostly because, one, I wanted to add Major Lesson. You could take Hex Focus instead of Major Lesson, and then your level 20 feet can be whatever, but for this build, this is the route I went. Kind of goes up to you. And oh, something I forgot to mention about Rites of Convocation. You can just retrain the feats to change the summoning spell that it's attached to. So when you get higher level summons, for instance, like Summon Fiends, you can just replace Rites of Convocation with that spell. Or with that spell. So at level 16, Effortless Concentration. This is huge because it gives us a free concentration action every turn. In addition to this, we can get our full turn back if we use Cackle, which is really cool. Something that I really like about this build is it makes summoning not only just better and better, but it makes it less of a burden on your character as well. And level 16 is when other classes who don't multiclass Archetype would be able to get 2 summons in the first place. So automatically now with this, we get 1 free summon. We don't even need to use Cackle. And on our turns when we're sustaining our summons, one of them is already pre-sustained, which is pretty cool. So honestly, it's a really good pickup. It opens up your dynamicness and it makes you a force to be reckoned with. At level 18, I took Split Hex. This is actually a really good one if you have the action economy to do so, because it allows you to, if you took Major Lesson, for instance, to drop your Hex on 2 people rather than just 1. Or if you're just going to be using your Hex cantrip, in our case, the Stoke the Heart Hex cantrip, which just bumps up damage, is a pretty good one. It's really good. It's honestly very, very solid, and it allows us to more amp up our team, more do a variety of things. This can be flexible for any kind of build, and like I said, if you decided not to go with the Major Lesson, you could select whatever you want at this level. And at level 20, I went with Hex Master, as I said before. This is insanely good because we're already getting some utility off of Effortless Concentration. So if we wanted to use Cackle to instead sustain one of our other hexes, or all of our hexes, I mean, you could have Stoke the Heart plus whatever you get from Major Lesson, in addition with 1 focus action, and then all you, like, in this turn, right? So at this level 20, when you have Hex Master, in 1 turn, you automatically sustain one of your summons. You have to spend an action to sustain the other summon, but you also can Cackle to sustain 2 hexes potentially, meaning that you can sustain 4 hexes or 4 things in a round for essentially just 1 action and a focus point. It's pretty good, honestly. You can still cast a spell with that too. Like, it's a really fun build. It's really good. Like, a lot of this existed before the remaster. The remaster just kind of added the little bit on top, because with our familiar getting a benefit every time we use or sustain a hex, I mean, we're pumping out benefits to our team. No matter what patron you select, no matter what focus or what hex spells you're using, it's a really good build. I love Witch. I love the Summoner Witch build. I love summons in this game in general, and I believe Witch is probably the best class for summons, which, sorry, Summoner, just how it is. In any regard, this is normally where I go into the gear section. The only gear I'm really going to recommend is like a flying broomstick or something. Something that I can, not even a flying broomstick, anything that can keep you out of harm's way, like, easier, is just going to be the best, because unfortunately this build makes you very vulnerable to getting attacked. Now, if your GM is being a bit of a dick, they can just circumvent your summons potentially and get to you. Granted, there's a lot of summons that can actually prevent this as well. But if your DM is just like attacking your character because it's the smart thing to do or whatever you can do to keep out of combat is better. And honestly, if the GM is putting so many resources into stopping one witch who's using summons when there's potentially other more DPR focused characters on the battlefield, then you're just providing your team a tanking service, which, you know, there's not really a downside in this, only for you, I guess, but in a team aspect, there's really no downside. And like I said, there's tons of familiar summons that you can use that can grapple enemies, that get reactive strike, or all kinds of things. The enemies are going to have to deal with them, or it's going to hurt. And with the many ways spellcasters can just keep out of combat or keep out of danger in general, I mean, there's really not much to say other than this is a really good build. And like I said, summonings also just have so much utility, so much ability. If it can be done in a minute, Witch can do it because, or any summoner really can, but Witch especially can do it because it's really easy to just pick a summon out that knows exactly what you want or is going to do exactly what you need in that situation. So for archetypes, if you're using the free archetype rule, especially, which I recommend everyone does because it's the best rule in the game, free archetype wise, I'm going to recommend picking up Wizard through free archetype. It's just, it frees up your spells, frees up your feats. There we go. My bad. Tongue twisted there. It frees up your feats to allow you to select things like Ceremonial Dagger, which gives you a free spell slot pretty much, or two, technically every day, as long as you have expendable daggers. Very solid. It's just something that will free up your character to do other things. And it's something that I would very much recommend doing. Now, if you want to just keep the build as is and add on top of it, then I'm going to recommend Time Mage. Time Mage is very fun. There's some really good spells you can get out of it, slow spells, other focus spells that you can pick up as well. But the funnest part about it is the feats. What could have been. It's a really funny feat. It's a really fun one. It allows you to summon a different dimension version of yourself from another time, another timeline. You could summon yourself as a troll or whatever. And the fun thing about this one is the creature gets extra bonuses towards skills that you're particularly trained in, which can make even investing in athletics something great on a witch because it can make a creature even better at grappling. And if it's not if you're not trained in a skill, you get a penalty. But you know, the benefits far out. Like this makes investing in athletics as a witch very worthwhile because you can make an already super high athletics creature have an even bigger bonus to athletics, which is super fun. And it's an alternate version of yourself, which with Fiendish, the Fiendish idea, like summoning fiends or demons or whatever, that's especially really, really cool. Like aesthetically, it's very, very cool. The last archetype I'm going to recommend is actually going to be Marshal. Now, you do need martial weapon proficiency in order to do this, but you can just take the general free weapon training to get trained in all martial weapons anyway. So one general feat and selecting Marshal in addition, inspiring Marshal stance can amp up all your summons or whatever the way you want to go about doing it. It's one that I recommend only because once you're in the stance, you're good. Now, obviously, that takes a turn economy because you can't get into this and summon in the same round. So either you're getting into this in the first round, casting a spell or whatever, or you're summoning first and then getting into the stance on the not even the second turn, maybe the third turn, unless you didn't want two summons. Which even just one summon is not necessarily a bad way to play the build, especially once you get Effortless Concentration, and then you can just essentially have a free summon on the field that doesn't cost any action economies. So Marshal stance really kind of suited the build in my eyes, but there's probably better. There's like the Bard multiclass archetype if you want to try to fit that in as well. In any regard, these are my recommendations. And finally, we're getting to the Ancestry and Heritages, and honestly, I know this one comes up a lot, but it's always just really handy. Human's really good. Being able to pick up Cackle at level 1 makes that level 1 summoning even better because then the creature is only, well, I guess I lied earlier. Technically at level 2, the summons are 3 levels under you rather than 2. But at level 1, they're only 2 levels under you. So that being the case, human just fits really, really well. There's also some funky stuff you can kind of do with Hobgoblin if you kind of want to go a little bit more martially with this. So yeah, I mean, like the attributes that are required for this build are actually not that high. And if you're not super worried about using your hexes, dumping a little bit of your intelligence to add some dex or strength and flanking with your summons, getting some cool things with Hobgoblin could be really cool too. But that's going to be it for the build. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. If you like summoning builds, this is probably one of the best summoning builds I could come up with. Like I said, Summoner just lacks the spell slots. You're just going to run out of them way too quickly. And Wizard could do a lot of the similar stuff, but they would just, it would be the inverse, right? So you would have to go into Witch to pick up Cackle, like Witch went in to go get Fortifying Summons. And Fortifying Summons is not nearly as necessary as Cackle is in general. So like even if you went in as a wizard and you got Cackle, you're just going to be using Cackle more than your own school spell anyway. Plus, Witch gets the opportunity to pick from any of the traditions when it comes to selecting what types of summons they want to go with, while Wizard is stuck with just Arcane. So, yeah, Witch being the best summoner is really cool. There's a lot of really cool summons you can do. And in use with your familiar, I mean, you just have a lot going on your turns. There's a lot you can do. There's a lot of really fun ways you can do this. You can debuff the enemies, all kinds of things. I hope you liked the video. Please let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments. And if you like this kind of content and you want other people to see it, hit the like button and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, as I tried to do a build video, circumstances for forgiving, every week. There's some weeks, obviously, like the last 2 weeks, I was just kind of getting over my blitz, but I try to do a new build every week. And now with the remaster out, I'm going to do a build for each of the classes that got a remaster. Anyway, that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me. And I'll see y'all next time. Bye.